In this series of videos, we're going to be programming the pre-release for the UK IGCSE Computer Science with Cambridge for the summer of 2022. If you are not in the UK, please check which pre-release you need to be doing. The UK one here is used in other countries as well, but you absolutely 100% need to check where that is. If you're my student, then check with me and I will clarify for you if this is the right one. Okay, so your pre-release is going to be the same for the UK, whether or not you have the 0984 or the 0478 exam code. It's just the different marking scheme as well. And this year's summer pre-release is actually a good one. I like it. It's some of them can be a bit boring, a bit convoluted. This is a good one. So let's have a read through first. It says, in preparation for the examination, candidate should attempt the following practical tasks by writing and testing a programme or programmes. Friends of Seaview Pier is an organisation devoted to the restoration and upkeep of a pier in the town. A pier is a wooden structure that provides a walkway over the sea. The pier requires regular maintenance and the Friends of the Pier need to raise money for this purpose. Members of Friends of Seaview Pier each pay $75 per year as a contribution to the pier's running costs. This entitles them to free admission to the pier throughout the year. They can also volunteer to help run the pier by working at the pier entrance gate, working in the gift shop, or painting and decorating. To provide additional income, the pier's wooden planks can be sponsored. A brass plaque, which contains a short message of the sponsor's choice, is fitted to a plank on the pier for a donation of $200. Write and test a programme or programmes for Friends of Seaview Pier. Your programme or programmes must include appropriate prompts for data entry. Data must be validated on entry. All outputs, including error messages, need to be set out clearly and understandably. All variables, constants and other identifiers must have meaningful names. You will need to complete these 3 tasks. Each task must be fully tested. Okay, so you can see there that this is almost exactly the same as all the other pre-releases. They are actually getting rid of the pre-release after this year, but up until then, we're still doing these 3 tasks. So the first task is basically adding a new member, and we're adding data as to whether or not they're volunteering, whether or not they've paid their fee. The second task is doing reports of who are volunteers for different areas, who is a volunteer or not, and whether or not people have paid their $75 for this year. And then the final task is allowing and extending task 1 so that we can allow them to add or sponsor a brass plaque and make that $200 charge or donation. So it's a nice, simple task, really. There's not a massive amount that's too tricky with this. I think the main issue that people might have problems with is the fact that we're doing stuff with dates. So we're checking to see at some point whether or not someone has paid their $75 fee. So whether someone has their membership has expired, and we need to do some work with dates with that. Otherwise, it's really straightforward. So as with all the tasks that I have done and all the other pre-releases, we're going to take each task one at a time and we're going to break it down as to what they want us to do. So task 1, it says, becoming a member of Friends of Seaview Pier. It says, set up a system to enable people to become members of Friends of Seaview Pier, and for each new member, enter their first name and last name, whether or not they wish to work as a volunteer, and if they choose to work as a volunteer, identify the area from the pier, the gift shop, painting and decorating, add the date of joining, and then whether or not they have paid their $75 fee. And all of this information needs to be stored using suitable data structures. So for this GCSE, the suitable data structures is basically arrays, and we'll use different arrays, a new array for each sort of area where we're storing the data. So task 1 is actually a nice simple task. All we have to do is take their bullet points and we can just implement each one as we go. So let's start doing that. Let's open up our Python and you can code along with me and we'll do this solution. Okay, so I've opened up my Python idle. I'm using Python 3.10.1, which is just the latest version. It doesn't matter if you're using an older version. That's absolutely fine. Python 3.10.0 onwards has case statements, but we don't really need a case statement for this pre-release, but that's okay. If you wanted to, you could do, but I won't be using them in my solution. Okay, so I'm going to open up and create a new file, and this is going to be my coding file here, and I'm just going to save it and save it as a blank document. So I'm just going to call it, I'm going to put it on my desktop, and I'm going to call it Summer 2022. Okay, so I've got my blank file. First thing we need to do is look at what the first task was, and that was to add somebody into the friends of the peer. So we kind of need a message to sort of give them welcome message to the program. It's always a good thing to do. So that's the first thing. I'm going to put print welcome to friends of Seaview peer, like that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to let them add new members. So we need to set up a system to let them do that. So we need to give them a menu item to do that. So I'm just going to say enter a menu item like this, and that we're only going to have one to start with, which is to add a member, but we will be adding others later on. So that's our first thing, and then we need to get that input of what they have done. So we're going to create a variable called user choice, and that's going to be our input from this. And I'm just going to put a colon there so that we can grab their user input, because remember, we need to grab what they want to do. And then we can say if they've entered the user choice, if they've entered an A, or we could also put that as a lowercase a as well. If user choice is a lowercase a, then that's they want to add a member. So all the code to adding a member is going to go under this big if statement. So the first thing that we need to do is let them add their first name and their last name. So let's do that. We let them enter their first name. Remember to indent your code here. Please enter your first name, and then we're going to enter the last name. Now, we do need to do validation, but there's not a lot of validation we can do on this. If we're entering their first name and last name, we could do a presence check. Presence check makes sure that it's not blank. However, because there is a wide variety of different names, I'm not going to do any checks on this. You can add something later on if you want it to be not blank, but I would say just leave it for now, and we'll do some other checks later on. So the next thing we need to do is add those two values to our data array, or to our data structure, and it says here that all of this information needs to be stored using suitable data structures. Now for this exam board, what they actually mean is arrays. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to add arrays, and we need basically one for each sort of type of data we're storing. So the first array that we're going to add it's going to be an array called first names. And this is going to store all the members' first names. Now we could just create it blank and add data, but for the sake of debug and just having a little bit of data in there, I'm going to add a couple of people in here, and we're going to have me, and we're going to have Bob. And then we need a last names array as well, and that is going to be our surnames. So that's and Bob's surname is Robertson, Bob Robertson. It's just made up. So when we have our new member here, we're going to add their names, their first name and their last name into those arrays. So I'm going to do first dot append first first names dot append, and then last names dot append last. So that's going to add the new members' values into those arrays. So I'm just going to check this. It's always good to check as you go along. I'm just going to run it just to make sure I haven't done anything stupid, and I haven't so far. So I'm going to click A to add a member, and it has added it. So I'm just going to enter some text there. It doesn't matter what it is. That's fine. There's no syntax errors. Now we don't know whether, we know that append does work. So what I'm actually going to do is for debug, so I'm just going to add a comment that says debug. I'm just going to print out all of the arrays that we create so that we can just check that everything's worked. And we can just hide this code once we're happy at the end and we've finished. And everything's working. And this is a common thing that you do as a programmer, is you have what we call debug code that will be not used in the live program. So if I add a member, enter my first name, I'll add something sensible now, or not quite so sensible. And there we go. We can see underneath it's printed out the arrays. It's added in Donald Trump into our first name and our last name arrays. Okay, so the next thing, we've done that first one, we've done that first bullet point there, and we can just take their bullet points. It's nicely, easily laid out, whether or not they wish to work as a volunteer. So that's the next thing we do. And obviously underneath that, we need to see where they want to volunteer if they do, but we can just handle that first top level first, whether or not they wish to work as a volunteer. So let's add that in. So we need an array to store that data. So I'm going to call it volunteers. And now we've got two options here. We can store this as a Boolean, true or false, or we can store this as a Y or N as text. Now, it's always nice if you can to store Booleans. So that's what I'm going to do actually. I'm going to store these as Booleans. So I'm going to put my data in here, true or false. Now remember that everything in these arrays is organised by the index of the array. So we're using multiple arrays, but we're storing data on these people because of where they are in the index. So every single array, if I go to index 0, that will give my data, Julia Roebuck, and it's true that I'm a volunteer. And index 1 is Bob Robertson, and it's false that he's a volunteer. Okay, so this is what we're going to do for all of it. We're going to use multiple arrays, but we find the data for each person based on the index of where they are. So if I added in Donald Trump, as I had earlier, as our third person, then we're going to add here that Donald is a volunteer because Donald is index number 2. Okay. Okay, so we now need to get that data, whether or not they're a volunteer. So we do exactly the same thing. We need an input. So we just create a new variable. I'm going to call it vol, and we're going to input is the new member a volunteer worker. And we can prompt as to whether or not what we want them to say. So I'm going to put y/n. We don't really want them having to enter true or false because that's just something that users shouldn't have to do. So we can basically say if vol equals capital Y or vol double equals a lowercase y, they are a volunteer. So we need to add that into our array. So we're going to put volunteers dot append true, and then we can ask to see where they want to go, and we're going to do that in a moment. But I'm just going to add the else first. So I'm just going to add the else, and we're going to say volunteers dot append false. Okay, so that should add that in. So let's just check that's okay, and then we'll work out, because we're going to do where they volunteer. That's going to be the next bit. So let's just run that, run module, and we can see what's going on. So we're going to add a new member, and this time who we're going to add. So I'm going to add in Boris. Boris is going to be my next volunteer. Boris Johnson. Is he going to work as a volunteer? Absolutely, yes. All right, so we can see there, obviously we finished our code, and it's printed out the debug, but actually I've forgotten to add the debug here. So if I just make this a bit, there we are. So we need to print out volunteers in our debug section, and I forgot to add that. So let's do that, volunteers, and I'm just going to run module, okay, and I'm just going to make this a bit smaller. It's really tricky. Let me just make this a bit smaller so you can actually see what I'm doing. There we go, right. So I'm going to add a new member, Boris Johnson. He is going to volunteer, and there we go. He's added in as a volunteer. Good, okay, I'm happy with that so far. Okay, so for the next thing we're going to do, we're going to have a look and see what we're going to do next. So if they're a volunteer, identify the area that they want to volunteer for. So it's either the peer entrance, the gift shop, or painting and decorating. So let's do that then. We're going to go back to this if statement here. It's an if within an if, and we're going to ask them where they want to volunteer. So we're going to say, where would you like to volunteer? And then we're going to give them an option of what to enter. So the first one is the entrance gate. The second one was the gift shop, so that could be G, gift shop. And then the next one would be painting and decorating. So I'll put painting and decorating. Personally, I think I'd probably go for the painting and decorating because I don't like working with the general public. I did lots of shop jobs when I was a student, and yeah, the general public are great, but I preferred working behind the scenes. So we're going to get that input. So I'm just going to call it area, and we're going to get that as an input of text. I'm just going to put a colon as a prompt. So that enter an E, a G, or a P. Now, this is where we could actually say, we could do some validation checks on this, because we need to make sure they don't enter something strange. So I'm going to add in a while loop into this section so that they either enter an E, a G, or a P. Okay, so let's do that. Let's do this. So we're going to have something called valid, a variable called valid, and it's going to be false. And then what we're going to do is start a while loop. While that variable valid is false, we're going to keep asking for them to enter their input. Then we're going to check to see, so I've added a while loop, we've got an if statement, and then a while loop that's inside the if statement. So make sure your alignments are correct and match mine. It's really, really important. Then what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if they've entered an E, a G, or a P. So we say if area is in, and then the text E, G, or P, and we could do those in lowercase as well. So I'm going to add them in as a lowercase e, a lowercase g, and a lowercase p as well. Then what this will do is it will check to see if they've entered those values, and if they have, then we can set valid equal to true. So they've entered what we wanted them to. So basically what in does is it checks to make sure that what they've entered is in this set. It's called set theory. It's a big part of computer science, and this will check to see whether or not they've entered any of these letters here. So if we just test that now and we just run that, what we can do is we can say add and enter your first name, Boris Johnson. They are going to work as a volunteer. So if I enter something that's odd, it just keeps asking. We could put a message to say if it's not in, we could put an else in, but until I enter one of those values, it will keep going. So basically the last thing we need to do is then we need to just add that in to where they want to volunteer. So we need to add it in to our array, and actually I'll add it here underneath the valid equals true. So I'm going to say we need to create our array to store that. So I'm going to call it vol areas equals, and only add a value if we are volunteers. So I'm going to put me as a gift shop, and then I'm going to put Bob as NA because he's not a volunteer. So I'm going to put not applicable. NA is not applicable. And then Donald Trump's volunteering. He can do the painting and decorating. There we go. So we need to add that into our array down here. So I'm going to say vol areas dot append, and then I'm going to add on the area that they added. Now I'm going to do area dot upper, so that it makes everything uppercase. So if they entered a lowercase e, it will put it as uppercase. So let's just check that. I think that syntax is right. We'll just check to see. Oh, actually, before we do run this, I'm just going to print out that new array. So we've got a new array down here, and I'm just going to add that in so that we can check that it's added it, and we called it vol areas, like that. Okay, let's run this. So let's put him there with, there we go, good. So we've got that works correctly, good. I'm really happy with that. Okay, so I'm just going to let you see the code again. This is the end of this video so far, and I'm just going to let you see the code. So in case you need to look at any of it, especially this section here, because we've got a few blocks of code that are inside other blocks of code. So you need to make sure that your indentations are exactly as mine are, otherwise you will get errors. And there's the debug right at the end as well. See you in the next video.